My phone rang while I was standing knee-deep in Morgan Lake holding a fishing rod that had seen better days. The caller ID showed a local Atlanta number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. Thank God I did. "Mom!" My son Alexander's voice cracked like he was 12 years old again, not a 32-year-old software engineer. "Mom, I need help." I dropped the base I'd just caught. It flopped back into the water my lake, though Alexander didn't know that. He didn't know I owned the 900 acres of Georgia forest surrounding it either. He thought his mother survived on a small pension and whatever fish I managed to catch. "Alex, honey, what's wrong?" The sound that came through the phone made my heart stop. It was the sound of my grown son trying not to cry in public. I heard traffic in the background. Voices. A child whimpering. "Preston fired me this morning." His words tumbled out fast, desperate. "Changed the locks on the house. Kicked me and Ethan out." "Mom, we're sitting in Centennial Park with everything we own in 3 broken suitcases." I was already walking toward my rusted 1998 Ford F-150. My tackle box clattered into the truck bed. "Stay exactly where you are," I sadly said. My voice came out calm, but my hands were shaking. "I'm 20 minutes away." "Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't know who else to call." "Do you have space just for tonight?" Space, I could have laughed. I owned a $12 billion private equity firm. I had 6 homes across 3 continents. But to my son, I was just his retired mother living in a cabin with a leaking roof. I'd raised him that way on purpose. I wanted him to value hard work over inheritance, to build his own life. But Preston Sterling had just made the biggest mistake of his privileged, arrogant life. He'd threatened my family. "I'll be there in 15 minutes, I told Alexander. Then I hung up and drove that old truck like it was a Ferrari. My phone buzzed again as I hit the highway, this time my satellite phone. The one only 3 people in the world had the number to. I answered on Bluetooth. "Rebecca." "Elizabeth." My former general counsel's voice was crisp alert. "I'm seeing some unusual activity on Alexander's employment records. Sterling Tech just filed termination paperwork. What's happening?" Rebecca Walsh had been with me for 20 years. She ran Morgan Capital's day-to-day operations from our Manhattan headquarters while I played hermit in the Georgia woods. "Preston Sterling just declared war," I said quietly. "He fired Alex, threw my grandson onto the street, told my son his bloodline wasn't worthy." The silence on the other end lasted exactly 3 seconds. "I see." Rebecca's tone shifted from concerned to lethal. "What are your orders?" "Pull everything you can find on Sterling Tech. I want their financials, their debt structure, their exposure, everything. I'll call you back in an hour. Consider it done." I pushed the accelerator harder. The old truck groaned, but it moved. 23 years ago, my husband died and left me with a 3-year-old son and a small investment firm nobody thought I could run. They expected me to sell, to disappear. Instead, I built an empire. I walked away from it 10 years ago when Alexander graduated from Georgia Tech. Let him think I was just a simple widow who liked to fish. Let him build his own confidence, his own career. But today I was going back to war, and Preston Sterling was about to learn what happened when you underestimated a woman just because she wore flannel and drove a beat-up truck. Centennial Park on a Tuesday afternoon should have been peaceful. Families having picnics, kids playing on the grass, couples walking hand in hand. Instead, I pulled up to see my son sitting on a bench looking like his entire world had ended. Because it had. Alexander was hunched over with his elbows on his knees, head in his hands. He'd always been lean, but now he looked thin, hollowed out. Next to him sat my 6-year-old grandson Ethan, clutching a teddy bear that was missing half its fur. But what broke me were the suitcases. 3 expensive hard-shell bags, the kind that cost $500 each. The kind Melissa had insisted on buying for their honeymoon to Bali. Now they were broken open on the sidewalk, clothes spilling out like guts from a wound. I could see Alexander's dress shirts dragging in the dirt. Ethan's little sneakers scattered across the concrete. A framed photo of my late husband Alexander's father lay face down in a puddle. They'd been thrown. Not packed. Thrown. I killed the engine and stepped out. The truck door slammed louder than I intended. Alexander looked up. The shame in his eyes was almost physical. He stood quickly wiping his face, trying to pull himself together. "Mom, thanks for coming. I know it's a long drive." I walked right past him and knelt in front of Ethan. "Hey there, sweetheart." I kept my voice gentle even though rage was building in my chest like a hurricane. You ready for an adventure at Grandma's cabin? We can roast marshmallows. Ethan's bottom lip trembled. He was trying so hard to be brave. Grandma, he whispered. Are we poor now? Daddy said we can't go home. I heard Alexander make a sound behind me, halfway between a sob and a cough. I cupped Ethan's face in my hands. No, baby, we're not poor. We're just relocating. Sometimes the best treasures are hidden where no one thinks to look. I stood up slowly, my knees popping. 60 years old, but I felt strong. Dangerous. Leo. I used the childhood nickname deliberately. Look at me. He finally met my eyes. What happened? And don't give me the sanitized version. I want the truth. Alexander took a shuddering breath. I went to work this morning. Preston called me into his office at 9. I thought we were discussing the new software rollout. The system I built. 3 years of work. Saved the company $3 million annually. And he didn't even look at me, Mom. Just slid termination papers across his mahogany desk. Said they were downsizing. I asked why. I asked about my severance, my stock options. His voice cracked. He pressed a button. Security came. 2 guys I've known for 5 years. They walked me to the curb like I was a criminal. I felt ice spreading through my veins. And Melissa, Alexander looked at the broken suitcases. I got home an hour later. My key didn't work. The locks were already changed. They had a locksmith there before I even left the building. Jesus! I banged on the door. I could hear them inside. Melissa opened it, but she didn't let me in. Just stood there blocking the doorway. He paused. She said she couldn't be with a failure, that she needed security and I couldn't provide it anymore. She chose her daddy's money over her husband. Preston came to the door. Alexander's hands were shaking now. He kicked these suitcases down the front steps. They broke open. All our clothes just everywhere. Then he looked at Ethan and said, his voice broke completely. I put my hand on his shoulder. What did he say, Alex? He said your bloodline is weak, Alexander. It's a servant's bloodline. The Sterling family needs noble blood to survive. We found someone better for Melissa. Someone worthy. The word hung in the air between us. Worthy. I looked at my son, a man who'd never asked me for a dime, who worked 18-hour days to support a wife who spent money like water, who was such a good father that even now broken and humiliated his first thought had been protecting his child. Preston Sterling thought his bloodline was noble because he'd inherited a mid-sized tech company from his daddy. He didn't know that the woman standing in front of him in a stained fishing vest could buy his entire existence with a single phone call. But he was about to find out. I grabbed one of the broken suitcases. The handle was snapped, but I lifted it anyway. Get in the truck, I said. Mom, we can't impose. I grabbed his shoulder. My grip was iron. You're not imposing. You're coming home. And as for your bloodline, I walked to the truck and threw the suitcase in the back. It landed with a heavy thud next to my tackle box. I turned back to my son. For the first time that day, I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. We're going to show Preston Sterling exactly what the Morgan bloodline is capable of. Alexander looked confused, but he nodded. He picked up Ethan and the other bags. As we drove away from that park, I watched the Atlanta skyline in my rearview mirror. Somewhere in one of those glass towers, Preston Sterling was probably celebrating. He thought he'd crushed an insignificant employee. He had no idea he'd just declared war on one of the most powerful women in American finance. My cabin sat at the end of a dirt road hidden behind Georgia pines so thick you couldn't see it from the main highway. Alexander had been here dozens of times over the years. He knew every squeaky floorboard, every water stain on the ceiling. He thought it was all I could afford. As we pulled up, I watched his face in the rearview mirror. He was looking at the sagging porch, the rusty propane tank, the windows that didn't quite close all the way. I saw the exact moment shame hit him. Mom, he said quietly as I killed the engine. I didn't realize. I knew you were on a fixed income, but I didn't know it was this bad. Ethan had fallen asleep in the back seat, exhausted from crying. Alexander lifted him gently, cradling his son against his chest. Inside, I started a fire in the old wood stove. The cabin was cold. I'd been out fishing all morning. Alexander put Ethan on the lumpy couch and covered him with a quilt my grandmother had made. Then he looked around with fresh eyes. Really looked. The daylight coming through the roof beams where shingles were missing, the refrigerator that sounded like it was dying, the cracked linoleum floor. "Mom," his voice was thick. "Why didn't you tell me I could have helped? I should have helped." I stirred the fire, watching the kindling catch. "Tell you what, honey, that you were struggling, that things were this tight." He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture he'd done since he was a boy when he was stressed. "I've been sending Melissa $3,000 a month for her shopping, for her spa days, and you've been living like this." I wanted to laugh, to cry, to tell him the truth. Instead, I said, "I have everything I need, Alex." "No, you don't." His voice gained sudden determination. He walked over and put his hands on my shoulders. "Look, I know I lost my job today, but I can find work. Construction. Waiting tables. I'll take double shifts if I have to. I'm going to fix this place, Mom. I promise. New roof before winter. I promise you." I looked at my son. He'd just lost his career, his wife, his home. He had maybe $5,000 to his name and a child to feed. And his first instinct was to promise to fix his mother's roof. This was the bloodline Preston Sterling called unworthy. This was the character he'd spat on. I felt something crack in my chest, not breaking but opening, like ice melting after a long winter. "Don't worry about the roof," I said softly. "Worry about getting some rest. You've had a hell of a day." "But Mom, we'll talk about it tomorrow. Right now you need sleep." He nodded reluctantly. I showed him to the tiny spare bedroom, really just a closet with a twin mattress. He'd slept there every Christmas for 10 years, never complaining. "Good night, Mom, and thank you for everything." After he closed the door, I waited, listened to the old house settle, heard Alexander's breathing even out as exhaustion finally claimed him. Then I moved. Behind the storage closet, there was a section of wall that looked like all the others, weathered pine covered in dust. But if you knew where to press, it swung open on silent hinges. Rebecca had it installed 5 years ago. She'd insisted. "You can play the hermit," she'd said, "but you need a secure room, just in case." The steel door behind the false wall was state-of-the-art. Biometric lock, soundproofing, climate control. I pressed my thumb to the scanner and heard the heavy bolts slide back. Inside was a different world. 3 monitors showed real-time stock feeds from Tokyo, London, New York. A secure satellite phone sat in its charging cradle. Filing cabinets held documents that could move markets. And on the wall in a locked case were 3 things a Glock 19 I hoped I'd never need my original passport from before I changed my identity for privacy in a photograph. The photo showed me 30 years ago, standing in front of the New York Stock Exchange, ringing the opening bell. I was 30 years old, pregnant with Alexander, wearing a power suit that cost more than most people's cars. The caption read, "Elizabeth Morgan, youngest woman to take a company public in financial sector history." I'd walked away from public life after that, built my empire quietly, let other people have the headlines while I accumulated real power, the kind that whispers instead of shouts. I picked up the satellite phone and dialed Rebecca's private line. She answered on the first ring. "Elizabeth, I need you to wake up the board." There was a pause. "We haven't had a Code Falcon alert in 5 years. Are you compromised?" "No, but Preston Sterling is about to be." I heard rapid typing on her end. "What's the play?" "I want everything on Sterling Tech. And I mean everything. Their debt structure, their payment schedules, their exposure. I want to know every bank they owe, every line of credit, every mortgage." "That'll take a few hours." "You have 2, more typing." Then Rebecca's voice turned cold, the voice she used in hostile takeovers. "If he touched family, he's not just a target, Elizabeth. He's a carcass. What happened?" I told her. All of it. The firing, the changed locks, the suitcases thrown onto the street, the way Preston had looked at my grandson and called his bloodline weak. When I finished, Rebecca was silent for 10 seconds. "I'm pulling the data now," she finally said. "But Elizabeth, Sterling Tech is a sinking ship. Their financials are a disaster. We've avoided them for 2 quarters because their debt-to-equity ratio is toxic. Why would you want to touch that radioactive waste?" "Because he made it personal." "I see." Rebecca's tone shifted again. "Then we're not buying stock. We're buying the debt. All of it. That's going to cost— I don't care about the premium. I want every outstanding loan, every line of credit, every mortgage Preston Sterling has. I want to own the air he breathes by sunrise." I heard her smile. Hold on, I'm accessing the dark pool data now. While I waited, I traced the lion's head logo on my company seal. Morgan Capital, named after my maiden name, the name I'd reclaimed after my husband died. The name Preston Sterling was about to learn to fear. Okay, Rebecca came back on. It's worse than we thought. Sterling Tech is underwater by $47 million. He's leveraged everything. The company accounts, the real estate, even his personal assets. Who holds the primary note? A consortium of regional banks. But here's the interesting part. He has a balloon payment due Monday. That's 48 hours from now. If he misses it, the default clause triggers. I smiled in the darkness. And we're going to make sure he misses it. There's a complication. I'm seeing a pending capital injection. Looks like he's trying to secure a bridge loan from a private investor. My stomach tightened. Who? Julian Ashford. The name hit me like a slap. Julian Ashford, son of Senator Thomas Ashford, known in society pages for crashing Ferraris, known in financial circles for money laundering and influence peddling. He's trading Melissa, I said quietly. Preston's selling his daughter to Ashford in exchange for a bridge loan. That's my assessment. I closed my eyes. Melissa had never been kind to me. She'd barely tolerated me at family gatherings, making snide comments about my shabby cabin and embarrassing truck. But she was still the mother of my grandson, and Preston was using her like currency. Rebecca, I want you to freeze Ashford out. Contact our friends at FinCEN. Flag his accounts for suspicious activity. Trigger a Patriot Act audit. Make it so he can't write a check for coffee, let alone $47 million. That's aggressive. Could cause political blowback. Let it blow back. I want Preston walking into that bank Monday morning thinking he has a lifeline, only to find out I'm holding both ends of the rope. Understood. I'll have the debt purchase completed by 6 a.m. Ashford's accounts will be frozen by 8 a.m. What else? I thought for a moment. Send someone to sanitize Alexander's digital footprint from Sterling's servers. Preston's going to try to use him as a patsy for whatever financial crimes he's committed. I want my son's name completely clean. Consider it done. Anything else? Yes. Charter a car service, black sedan. Have it here at 4 p.m. tomorrow. Tell them to bring 2 Brioni suits, one for me, one for Alexander. Size 42 long for him. And send Giovanni. Rebecca laughed. The Taylor Elizabeth, are you coming out of retirement? Just for one night. Preston's hosting a charity gala tomorrow evening. $20,000 a plate fundraiser to save his dying company. And you're going to outbid him at his own party. I'm going to do more than that. I'm going to teach him what it means to threaten a Morgan. We talked for another 20 minutes, finalizing details. By the time I hung up, Rebecca had put together a task force of 12 people working through the night. By dawn, Preston Sterling's world would be collapsing. He just wouldn't know it yet. I was about to close the safe room when I heard a sound in the hallway. My heart stopped. I turned to find Alexander standing at the end of the hall, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He was wearing his wrinkled t-shirt and boxers, looking small and vulnerable in the shadows. He was staring right at me. Mom! His voice was groggy. Who were you talking to? My mind raced. Had he heard me say 47 million? Had he heard Morgan Capital? I walked toward him quickly, keeping my face in shadow until I could control my expression. Just calling to order pizza for tomorrow, honey. Couldn't sleep. Thought we could use some comfort food. Alexander squinted at me. Mom, it's 3 a.m. No pizza place is open. I was leaving a voicemail for when they open. You know how much Ethan loves pepperoni. He stared at me for a long moment. I could see his software engineer brain working, trying to process why his mother would be up at 3 a.m. ordering lunch. But he was too tired, too broken. The fight went out of him. He slumped against the door frame. I can't eat, Mom. I can't sleep. I keep thinking about what Preston said. About my bloodline. Maybe he's right. I'm 32 and sleeping in my mother's spare room. I couldn't protect my wife. I couldn't keep my house. Maybe I'm just weak. I crossed the distance in 2 strides and grabbed him by both shoulders. Listen to me, Alexander. Weakness isn't losing your job. Weakness isn't losing your house. Weakness is sacrificing your family to save your ego. That's what Preston did. I steered him back toward the bedroom. You're still standing. You're still worrying about your son. That's not weakness. That's strength. But I have nothing, Mom. No leverage. I want to go back there and smash his face in. No. My voice was sharp. That's what thugs do. And you're not a thug. You're a Morgan. I sat him on the edge of the mattress. We don't use our fists, Alex. Violence is for the incompetent. When someone takes something from you, you don't break their nose. You take what they value most. You take the ground they stand on until they have no choice but to kneel. Alexander looked up at me through red-rimmed eyes. What does Preston value most? I pulled the thin blanket over him. He values his image, the lie that he's better than us. And tomorrow we're going to take that lie and shatter it into 1,000 pieces. How? I smiled. Go to sleep. Tomorrow we're going shopping. Shopping, Mom, we don't have any money. I patted his leg. Let me worry about money. You just worry about looking the part. After he fell asleep, I went back to the kitchen and sat in the dark watching the sun slowly bleed gray light through the pines. Preston Sterling had 48 hours left in his comfortable life, and I intended to make every single second count. The iron gates of the Sterling estate loomed ahead like the entrance to a fortress built on ego and borrowed money. I parked my rusted F-150 right in front, deliberately provocatively. The security guard came running out of his booth, waving his arms. Ma'am, this is private property. You can't. I rolled down my window. Tell Preston his past is here to collect. The young guard couldn't have been more than 22, reached for his radio. I didn't wait for him to call. I shifted into low gear and pressed the accelerator. The truck's reinforced bumper 1 modification Rebecca had insisted on made contact with the ornate iron gates. Metal groaned. The lock snapped with a sound like a gunshot. The gates swung open. Alexander grabbed the dashboard. Mom, what are you doing? Getting my grandson's stuffed animals back. I drove up the long circular driveway past manicured hedges that probably cost more than most people earned in a year. I parked my leaking truck right behind a silver Bentley Continental. The contrast was deliberate. Rust next to chrome. Poverty next to privilege. Except the poverty was a lie. The front door opened before I even killed the engine. Preston Sterling marched out, and he wasn't alone. Behind him stood a group of people in cocktail attire holding champagne flutes. I recognized a few faces, a city councilman, a real estate developer. The kind of people who smiled with their teeth, but never their eyes. Preston stopped at the top of the marble stairs. He was wearing white linen pants and a polo shirt that probably cost $500. A cigar smoldered in his left hand. He looked down at us like we were stray dogs that had wandered onto his porch. Well, look who decided to crawl out of the woods. His voice boomed so his guests could hear every word. I thought you'd finally died in that shack, Elizabeth. I was waiting for the obituary so I could send flowers. His guests chuckled a low, polite sound that made my skin crawl. The service entrance is around back, Preston continued, where they collect the trash. Seems more your speed. I stepped out of the truck. My boots hit the Italian marble with a solid thunk that echoed. I'm here for my grandson's things, Preston, and to remind you that throwing a 6-year-old onto the street is a crime in this state. Alexander got out from the passenger side. He looked small standing next to the truck, but he straightened his spine when Preston's eyes landed on him. We need to talk about custody, Alexander said, voice shaking but gaining strength. You can't just lock me out. We have joint assets. We have a life. Preston laughed. It was a harsh bark that lacked any humor. Assets. You have nothing, Alexander. You lived in a house I paid the down payment for. You drove a car leased in my company's name. You were a pet we kept around because Melissa thought you were cute. He took a long drag from his cigar. But pets get old. And when they get old and useless, we put them outside. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick stack of bills wrapped in a blue bank band. He didn't hand it to Alexander. He tossed it into the air. $100 bills fluttered down like dead leaves, landing in the oil stain leaking from my truck and scattering across the marble driveway. There's your severance, Preston sneered. $5,000. Should buy you a nice tent and a few months of that cheap beer your mother drinks. Alexander's face burned crimson. He stared at the money on the ground, but I was already analyzing it. I bent down slowly, deliberately. Preston's guests laughed, thinking I was groveling. Preston grinned, looking down his nose at me. That's right, Elizabeth. Pick it up. It's probably more than your pension pays in a year. I reached for a bill near my boot, but I didn't put it in my pocket. I held it up to the sunlight. The paper was too crisp, too stiff. It felt wrong between my fingers. I'd spent 40 years in finance. I knew the feel of money that had been in circulation, and I knew the feel of money fresh from a Federal Reserve vault. I brought it closer to my face, examining the serial number. L449200001. I bent down and picked up another bill. L449200002. Sequential serial numbers. Uncirculated. And the Federal Reserve strip was slightly off-center. This wasn't money withdrawn from a local Bank of America. This was offshore cash, the kind you keep in a vault in the Caymans or Zurich, and bring into the country on a private jet when your domestic accounts are being monitored. A man who is downsizing his company because of budget cuts doesn't walk around with $5,000 in sequential offshore bills. A man who is broke uses credit cards. A man who's hiding assets uses cash. Preston Sterling wasn't just a cruel father-in-law. He was a criminal frantically trying to move liquidity before a crash. The laughter on the porch died as everyone watched me. They expected me to stuff the money into my pockets, to scramble for the rest like a beggar. Instead, I stacked 2 bills neatly together. I stood up slowly, dusting off my knees. I walked up the marble stairs. The security guard stepped forward, but Preston waved him off, expecting me to beg or thank him. I stopped 2 steps below Preston and looked him in the eye. For the first time, I saw a flicker of unease in his gaze. "You kept this in a humidity-controlled safe, didn't you, Preston?" My voice was low, steady, but it carried. "Zurich, Luxembourg. You didn't declare this at customs, did you?" Preston's smile faltered. "What are you talking about, you senile old—" I pulled the rest of the stack from his hand before he could react. I combined it with the bills I'd picked up and slapped the entire stack against his chest hard enough to make him stumble backward, spilling champagne onto his pristine white pants. "Keep it," I said loud enough for the councilman and the developer to hear. "You're going to need it for sedatives, Preston, because when the auditors see what I just saw, you're going to have a very hard time sleeping." I turned and walked back to the truck. Preston sputtered on the porch, wiping champagne off his lap, shouting threats about trespassing and police. I didn't look back. As we drove away, I made sure my muddy tires rolled right over the money he'd thrown, pressing it into the expensive marble. Alexander stared at me wide-eyed. "Mom, what was that about? Why did you say that about auditors?" I kept my eyes on the road. "Because your father-in-law isn't just broke, Alex. He's a criminal, and I just found the first loose thread. Now we're going to pull it until his whole world unravels." I reached for my phone, the regular one, not the satellite, and made a show of checking something. "What are you doing, making an appointment?" I said. "We need to get you a proper suit." "Mom, we can't afford—" I said, "Let me worry about money." My voice was firm, final. "You just trust me. Can you do that?" Alexander looked out the window, watching the Sterling estate disappear behind us. "Yeah, Mom," he said quietly. "I can do that." "Good. Because tomorrow night we were going to a party, and Preston Sterling was going to learn that some bloodlines don't just survive, they conquer." The silence in my truck was heavier than Georgia humidity in July. Alexander stared out the window, watching pine trees blur past. In the back seat, Ethan had finally fallen asleep, exhausted from crying, clutching that ratty teddy bear like it was the only solid thing left in his world. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my mind was racing through calculations. Rebecca would have the debt purchase completed by morning. The FBI would have their financial crimes unit briefed by noon. Preston Sterling's world was already crumbling. He just didn't know it yet. Then Alexander's phone buzzed. The sound was harsh against the quiet hum of tires on asphalt. He pulled it from his pocket like a drowning man reaching for a rope. The screen lit up his face in pale blue light, and I watched his expression shift from despair to something fragile and desperate. Hope. He read the message once, then twice. Then he slumped back against the seat, letting out a long breath that sounded almost like relief. "It's Melissa," he said softly. I kept my eyes on the road, but my grip tightened on the steering wheel. "What does she want, Alex?" "She says she had no choice. Listen to this." He held up the phone, reading aloud. "Alex, I'm so sorry. Please don't hate me. Dad says the company is on the brink of collapse. The investors are pulling out. He says this marriage to Julian is the only way to save our family legacy. I have to sacrifice my happiness for the greater good. Please don't blame Dad. He's just trying to survive. I love you." Alexander lowered the phone, pressing it against his chest like it was something precious. "See, Mom. She's being forced. She's a victim in this, too. Preston's manipulating her just like he manipulated me." I wanted to snatch that phone and throw it out the window. This was the poison. This was how abusers worked. They painted themselves as victims of circumstance. They made you believe their cruelty was actually a form of sacrifice. "Alex," I said carefully, "look at me." He turned his head. "A woman who loves her husband doesn't let her father throw his clothes in the dirt. A mother who loves her child doesn't stand on a balcony drinking champagne while her 6-year-old gets kicked onto the street." "But she's scared of him, Mom. She's always been afraid." "Fear doesn't make you cruel, Alex. Fear makes you protective. If she was scared, she'd be in this truck with us right now." I merged onto the highway. "She's not scared. She's comfortable. She made a choice between a husband who works for a living and a lifestyle that requires millions." I paused, letting that sink in. "She chose the money." Alexander looked back out the window, turning away from the truth. "She's confused. Once I get back on my feet, once I show Preston I can make it on my own, she'll come back." I said nothing more. You can't wake someone who's pretending to sleep. You have to let them see for themselves. And tomorrow, Alexander would see everything. We got back to the cabin just as the sun was setting, painting the Georgia pines in shades of amber and gold. Alexander carried Ethan inside, put him on the couch, covered him with that old quilt. Then he turned to me with that determined look I recognized from when he was a boy. "Mom, I've been thinking. I should start applying for jobs tonight. Get my resume updated. Maybe you could look it over. You used to work in, what was it? Supply chain management." I almost laughed. Supply chain management. That's what I'd told him 20 years ago when he asked what Mommy did. "Sure, honey. Email it to me and I'll take a look." While Alexander played with Ethan, trying to make the boy smile, trying to pretend everything was normal, I sat at the kitchen table with his old laptop. He'd asked me to review his resume. I opened his email instead. I know it was a violation of privacy. I know a mother shouldn't snoop. But something Preston said had been nagging at me all afternoon. "You were a pet we kept around." Past tense. Were. Preston had been planning this. But why now? Why fire Alexander so abruptly, so viciously? I started scrolling through Alexander's sent folder. Nothing unusual. Project Updates code commits birthday emails to Melissa that went unanswered. Then I checked the trash folder. Most people think when you delete an email, it's gone. But Alexander was an engineer. He'd set up his email client to archive deleted items for 90 days. And there, buried in the trash, were dozens of emails from Sterling Tech's finance department. But they weren't addressed to Alexander. They were CC'd to a hidden distribution list that included his administrative account. I clicked on one dated 3 days before his firing. Subject Project Phoenix allocation. My blood ran cold as I read the body transfer authorization, $300,000 from Sterling Tech Nevada, LLC, to account number 847392, Cayman International Banking. Authorization signature, digital key, AM_dev_admin. User Alexander Morgan. I clicked another email. Same pattern. Another transfer, another digital signature with Alexander's credentials. And another, and another. 15 emails total. Nearly $4 million moved through offshore accounts, all with Alexander's digital signature authorizing the transfers. Except Alexander didn't know anything about it. Preston had set him up. The desperate firing. The vague accusation of downsizing. The rush to get Alexander out of the building, out of his house, away from any company systems. Preston wasn't just clearing space for a new son-in-law. He was creating a scapegoat. When the IRS or the FBI eventually knocked on Sterling Tech's door, Preston would point to these logs. He'd say, "Look, it was the lead engineer. He had administrative access. He moved the money. That's why I fired him when I found out." Alexander wasn't just unemployed. He was walking around with a federal crimes target on his back. I pulled out my satellite phone with shaking hands and texted Rebecca 3 words, "Sanitize the logs." Her response came in 30 seconds. "On it, 20 minutes." I sat back staring at the computer screen, feeling rage build in my chest like a slow-burning fire. Preston Sterling hadn't just attacked my family. He'd tried to destroy my son's entire future. He'd tried to send Alexander to prison to save his own skin. I thought about walking back to that estate right now. I thought about what it would feel like to wrap my hands around Preston's throat. But that wasn't how you destroyed a man like Preston Sterling. You didn't use violence. You used the system he thought protected him. You used his own greed against him. You took everything he valued and crushed it to dust while he watched. And tomorrow night, That's exactly what I was going to do. The next morning, I woke Alexander early. Get dressed, I said. We're going into the city. Mom, I should be job hunting. You have a job interview this afternoon. Now get dressed. I'd texted Rebecca at 5 a.m., send the car. At exactly 9 a.m., a black Mercedes S-Class pulled up to my cabin. The driver was a woman in her 30s, professional discreet. She didn't blink at the rundown cabin or my flannel shirt. Ms. Morgan, she said with a slight nod. I'm Claire. I'll be driving you today. Alexander's eyes went wide. Mom, who is this how did you old friends? I said smoothly. I called in a favor. Now get in. As we drove toward Atlanta, Alexander kept looking at me with questions he didn't know how to ask. The leather seats, the silent ride, the way Claire called me Ms. Morgan instead of ma'am. I watched his software engineer brain trying to process the data, trying to make it make sense. We pulled into the garment district, the old part of Atlanta where the buildings were brick and the streets were cobblestone. Claire stopped in front of a narrow alley wedged between two warehouses. There was no sign, no storefront, just a heavy oak door set into weathered brick. Mom, where are we? Getting you a suit. I pressed the brass buzzer once. A slot in the door slid open. Dark eyes peered out, then widened in recognition. The door swung open immediately. Giovanni Rossi stood there 70 years old, wearing a vest that looked hand-stitched by angels. He had a measuring tape draped around his neck and silver hair combed back perfectly. When he saw me, he bowed low, so low Alexander actually gasped. Signora Morgan. Giovanni said, his Italian accent thick with emotion. It has been too long. We feared you had forgotten us. I stepped inside, the smell of expensive wool and cedar surrounding us like an embrace. I've been fishing, Giovanni, but today I need to catch a shark, and for that my son needs to look dangerous. Giovanni's eyes shifted to Alexander, assessing him with a tailor's practiced gaze. He looks like you, Signora. Same shoulders, same bearing. He smiled. I have just the thing. A suit I cut for an ambassador who disappointed me in his payments. He disappeared into the back room. Alexander turned to me, voice low and urgent. Mom, who is this guy? He bowed to you like you were the Queen of England. You said you worked in supply chain management. Since when do supply chain managers have private tailors in hidden alleys who call them Signora? I kept my face neutral. Giovanni and I go way back. I helped him out of a difficult situation in Milan a long time ago. He's never forgotten it. It was a half-truth. I'd saved Giovanni's family business from bankruptcy when a real estate conglomerate tried to bulldoze his entire block to build condos. I'd bought the block myself, gave Giovanni a lifetime lease for $1 a year. Loyalty is a currency that never devalues. Giovanni returned carrying a garment bag. He unzipped it with reverence. The suit was midnight blue three-piece cut from vicuña wool, the kind of fabric that costs more per yard than most people make in a week. Try it on, I told Alexander. He disappeared into the changing room. I waited, sipping the espresso Giovanni had placed in my hand without asking. When Alexander stepped out, I saw the exact moment he understood. He stood in front of the three-way mirror and didn't recognize himself. The suit didn't just fit him, it transformed him. It broadened his shoulders, trimmed his waist, made him look tall and imposing and substantial. He didn't look like the guy who got fired yesterday. He looked like the guy who did the firing. I walked up behind him, meeting his eyes in the reflection. I reached out and adjusted his silk tie, tightening it just enough to be perfect. You look at yourself and you wonder who this man is, I said softly. He nodded, swallowing hard. I look like I'm playing dress-up, like a fraud. No, my voice was firm. The fraud was the man Preston kicked out of his house. That man was weak because he believed he was small. That man believed he needed permission to exist. I smoothed the lapels of his jacket. That man died on a park bench yesterday. I met his eyes in the mirror. The man wearing this suit is the new Alexander. This isn't a costume, honey. It's armor. When you walk into a room wearing this, you're not asking for a seat at the table. You're taking the table. Alexander took a deep breath. His chest expanded against the crisp white shirt. He squared his jaw. He looked at his reflection, and for the first time in 2 days, the shame was gone. In its place was something cold and sharp and focused. I'm ready, Mom. We thanked Giovanni. I left a stack of cash on the counter that made Alexander's eyes widen. $5,000 for a suit fitting. As we walked back to the Mercedes, Alexander was quiet. Then he stopped on the sidewalk. "Mom, that suit cost more than I made in a month at Sterling Tech. Giovanni treated you like royalty. That driver called you Ms. Morgan like it meant something." He looked at me. Really looked. "Who are you?" I could have lied. Could have deflected again. Instead, I said, "Get in the car, Alex. I'll explain on the way to the bank." "The bank? We have an appointment at First National, and I think Preston Sterling might be there too." As we drove, I told Alexander the truth. Not all of it, not yet, but enough. "When your father died, you were 3. I inherited his small investment firm, 3 employees, $2 million under management." I watched the Atlanta skyline grow larger through the windshield. Everyone expected me to sell. A widow with a toddler, they thought I'd crumble. "What did you do?" "I built an empire." I turned to face him. 25 years, Alex. I turned that firm into a $12 billion private equity fund. Morgan Capital. We don't make headlines. We make moves. Alexander's mouth opened. No sound came out. "I walked away 10 years ago when you graduated from Georgia Tech. Gave you a middle-class upbringing on purpose. I wanted you to value work, not inheritance. I wanted you to earn your confidence, not inherit it. 12 a billion, give or take. The markets fluctuate. So the cabin, the truck, the fishing. All real. I love that life. But I also own the lake, the forest, and about 40 other properties you've never heard of." Claire pulled into the financial district approaching First National Bank's marble facade. "Why didn't you tell me?" Alexander's voice cracked. "Because money changes people, Alex. I wanted you to become who you were meant to be first, and you did. You became a good man. A man who, even after losing everything, wanted to fix his mother's roof." I reached over and squeezed his hand. "But now you're ready to see what the Morgan bloodline can really do." The car stopped in front of the bank. Through the glass doors, I could see Preston Sterling in a loan officer's cubicle gesturing frantically. We walked into First National Bank like we owned it. Because in a way I did. Morgan Capital had been the primary investor in First National's expansion 3 years ago. The board owed me favors. The executives took my calls at midnight. But Preston Sterling didn't know that. He saw us enter from his seat in the loan officer's cubicle, saw my flannel shirt and Alexander's $1,000 suit that somehow still looked humble. For a second, I saw panic flash across his face. Then his arrogance came roaring back. He stood up abruptly, knocking his chair against the wall. The noise drew attention from every customer and teller in the marble lobby. Preston marched toward us, face already turning purple. "Well, I'll be damned." His voice echoed off the vaulted ceiling. "If it isn't the gutter rats, I didn't know they let vagrants into First National." People turned to stare. "What are you doing here, Elizabeth? Did you win the lottery, or are you here to steal the complimentary pens?" Alexander's face burned red. He started to back toward the door. I grabbed his wrist, held him in place. "We're conducting business, Preston," I said calmly. "Same as you, although from the looks of it ours is going much smoother." Preston laughed, a harsh barking sound. "Business. This is a bank for serious people, Elizabeth. We handle wealth management here, not welfare checks." He turned his venom on Alexander. "And you here to beg for a loan? Let me save you the credit check fee. You're worthless. No job, no home, and thanks to me, no references. You're radioactive." Preston stepped closer, invading my personal space. His breath smelled of mints masking morning whiskey. "I told you to disappear. But here you are, dragging your failure of a mother around like luggage." He looked around the lobby, performing. "It's pathetic." "Security," Preston shouted. "Get these 2 out of here. They're disturbing the peace. I'm trying to close $1 million deal and the smell of poverty is distracting me." The security guard, a heavy-set man with tired eyes, started walking toward us, hand resting on his belt. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voices or—" The door to the executive office at the back opened. Vincent Carter, the branch manager, stepped out. He was 6'3", silver hair, wearing a suit that cost more than Preston's car. He adjusted his glasses and surveyed the scene. Preston immediately straightened, wiping sweat from his upper lip, forcing his best charming smile. "Ah, Mr. Carter." Preston stepped forward, hand extended. "So sorry for the disturbance. Just dealing with some riffraff that wandered in. If you could have security remove them, we can get back to discussing that line of credit." Preston stood there, hand out, waiting for the handshake that would validate his status. Vincent Carter walked across the lobby, his polished shoes clicking rhythmically on marble. He walked straight toward Preston. Preston beamed, ready to be ushered into the private office. And then Vincent Carter walked right past him. Didn't even break stride. He breezed past Preston's outstretched hand like the man was invisible. He stopped directly in front of me. "Good morning, ma'am." Vincent's voice was low, respectful. "I apologize for the noise. We try to maintain a professional atmosphere here." I nodded slightly. "No apology necessary, Vincent. Just a minor annoyance." Alexander stared at me, then at the manager, then back at me. His mouth was slightly open. Preston sputtered. "Vincent, you know this woman. She's a nobody. She's a retired mechanic or something." "Mr. Sterling." Vincent turned slowly to face Preston. The warmth vanished from his eyes, replaced by the cold steel of a banker delivering bad news. "I was actually coming to deliver the decision on your loan application personally." Preston puffed out his chest. "Finally! Well, let's go sign the papers. I assume everything is in order. Your application has been denied." The silence that followed was absolute. Every conversation in the bank stopped. Every teller froze mid-transaction. Even the air conditioning seemed to quiet. "Denied," Preston whispered the word like it was a foreign language. "That's impossible. I have assets. The factory. The estate." "Actually, you don't." Vincent clasped his hands behind his back. "Our risk assessment team has flagged your collateral as highly distressed. Furthermore, we received notice this morning that your primary debt holder has sold your note." "Sold?" Preston's face went from red to gray. "Who bought it? Who holds my debt?" Vincent's eyes darted to me for a microsecond so fast that if you weren't looking for it, you'd miss it. But Alexander saw it, and Preston saw it. "That information is confidential pending official transfer," Vincent said smoothly. "However, the new creditor has issued strict instructions. There will be no extensions, no bridge loans, and no refinancing." He paused, letting that sink in. "You have until noon tomorrow to settle the outstanding balance of $47 million. If the funds are not wired by then, foreclosure proceedings on your business and personal residence will begin immediately." Preston staggered backward, clutching the edge of a desk for support. "Tomorrow? That's insane. I need a week, just a week, to liquidate some stocks." "You have 24 hours. Vincent's tone was final. "I suggest you spend less time shouting in my lobby and more time finding a miracle." He turned back to me and gave one last imperceptible nod before walking to his office. The heavy oak door closed with a click. Preston stood alone in the middle of the marble lobby. He looked small now. The expensive clothes looked like a costume. He looked around, but the tellers had gone back to work. The customers had looked away. The security guard had stepped back. He was isolated. I looked at Alexander. My son's back was straight now. He wasn't cowering. He was looking at his father-in-law with a mixture of shock and dawning understanding. "Come on, Alex," I said quietly. "We have what we came for." We turned and walked toward the glass doors. As we passed Preston, he didn't even look up. He was staring at the marble floor, muttering to himself, hands shaking. Once we were outside in the humid Atlanta air, Alexander waited until we were in the Mercedes before he spoke. "Mom," his voice was trembling. "Why did the manager look at you like that? Like he knew you?" I settled into the leather seat. "I've banked here a long time, honey. You get to know people." "No," Alexander shook his head. "That wasn't I know you. That was I work for you." He grabbed my arm. "Mom, what's going on? How did you know Preston would be denied, and who bought his debt?" I looked at my son. He was ready now, ready to understand. "I did, Alex. Morgan Capital purchased all of Sterling Tech's outstanding debt at 6 a.m. this morning. We paid 92 cents on the dollar to the consortium of banks that held it. They were thrilled to get rid of the toxic asset." You bought $47 million of debt in one night." "Technically, Rebecca did. She's my general counsel. But yes." Alexander leaned back against the seat, processing. "So when Vincent said the new creditor issued instructions, that was me. And when he said Preston has until noon tomorrow, I'm activating the acceleration clause. It's a standard provision in commercial loans. If the debtor engages in financial malfeasance or suffers reputational damage, the creditor can demand immediate full repayment." I smoothed my flannel shirt. "Preston's little scene at his estate yesterday, throwing offshore cash around while claiming to be broke, that's reputational damage. The FBI investigation we're launching into his money laundering, that's financial malfeasance. We're launching an FBI investigation. Rebecca contacted FinCEN this morning with the evidence of Preston's offshore transfers, the ones he tried to frame you for. Alexander went very still. He tried to frame me. I told him about the emails, the digital signatures, the $4 million moved through Cayman accounts with his credentials. Preston was going to let you go to federal prison to save himself, I said softly. But Rebecca sanitized the logs last night. Every trace of your administrator access to those accounts is gone. When the feds come looking, they'll only find Preston's fingerprints. Alexander's hands were shaking, not with fear, with rage. He was going to send me to prison while he took my wife and my son and my life. Yes. That's why he fired me so fast. That's why he threw me out. Yes. Alexander looked out the window at the Atlanta skyline. When he turned back to me, his eyes were cold, clear, focused. What do we do now, Mom? I smiled. We were halfway back to the cabin when Alexander's phone buzzed again. Another message from Melissa. This time I pulled the car over. Don't read it yet, I said. Trust me on this. Mom, please, Alex, just wait 5 minutes. I need to show you something first. I directed Claire to drive to the high-end shopping district, the jewelry quarter where diamonds cost more than houses. Where are we going? Alexander asked. You'll see. I had Claire park across the street from Tiffany and Company. Right in front was a white Mercedes convertible, the same car Alexander had leased for Melissa on their 3rd anniversary. That's... Alexander's voice trailed off. That's Melissa's car. What's she doing here? She's probably selling her jewelry, he said quickly, desperately, to help her father. She's sacrificing a watch, I said. Just watch. The glass doors opened. A security guard in a black suit held them wide, and Melissa walked out. She wasn't crying. She wasn't wearing the sweatpants of a woman in distress. She was radiant. White sundress, oversized Chanel sunglasses, carrying a small Tiffany blue bag. She looked like a woman who'd just won the lottery. And she wasn't alone. Walking beside her, hand possessively on her back, was a man I recognized from his file photo. Julian Ashford, 34 years old, son of Senator Thomas Ashford. Linen suit, hair slicked back with too much product, predatory smile showing too many teeth. Alexander made a sound in his throat, a strangled whimper like a wounded animal. No, that's not... Maybe he's just a friend. Maybe he's helping her sell... They stopped on the sidewalk. Julian said something that made Melissa laugh. Not a polite laugh. A genuine head-thrown-back laugh of delight. She reached up and touched his chest fingers, trailing down his lapel. Then Julian reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Black. Unmistakable. Alexander stopped breathing. Julian opened the box. Even from across the street, I could see the flash of the stone catching sunlight. A diamond. Massive. Gaudy. An engagement ring. Melissa didn't hesitate. Didn't look conflicted. Didn't look guilty. She squealed a sound we could hear over the traffic. She held out her hand and Julian slid the ring onto her finger. It replaced the simple, tasteful band Alexander had saved 3 months' salary to buy her 5 years ago. Then she threw her arms around Julian's neck. He spun her around like they were in a romantic movie, and they kissed. Not a peck on the cheek, not a friendly hug. A passionate, claiming public kiss right there on the sidewalk in front of Tiffany's. Alexander watched in absolute silence. I watched his face. I expected tears. Expected him to punch the dashboard, to scream. But he didn't. Slowly, something in his expression changed. The sadness evaporated. The confusion cleared. The desperate hope that had been keeping him alive for the past 2 days died a quiet death. In its place, something else formed. His jaw set. The muscles in his neck tightened. His eyes, which had been soft and pleading, turned hard. It was the look of a man who finally understands that being good isn't enough to protect you from evil. He took a deep breath and let it out slowly. He looked down at his hands. He was still wearing the cheap wedding band he'd bought when he was just a junior developer making $40,000 a year. He twisted it once, twice. Then he pulled it off. He held the ring in his palm for a second, feeling the weight of 5 years of lies. Then he opened the window and dropped it onto the asphalt. It didn't even make a sound when it hit the pavement. He turned to me. His voice was different now, deeper, steadier. It sounded like my voice. She knew, he said. Not a question. A statement. Yes. She knew about the money laundering. She knew about the setup. She knew about Julian. This wasn't sudden. You don't get a ring like that fitted in a day. No, you don't. While I was working late fixing her father's code, she was with him. Yes. Alexander nodded slowly, absorbing it, letting it fuel him instead of breaking him. She looked at me yesterday, when I was standing in that driveway with my clothes in the dirt. She looked right at me and turned her back. I know. I thought she was ashamed, but she wasn't, was she? No, honey, she was bored. Alexander closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, the last trace of the boy I'd raised was gone. The man sitting next to me was new, forged in fire, tempered in betrayal. He looked at me with terrible clarity. Mom, he said quietly, how do we destroy them? He didn't mean physically. I knew that. He meant something far more permanent, something that would strip them of everything they valued. I smiled. That son is exactly what I've been waiting to hear. I pulled out my phone and showed him a digital invitation. Sterling Tech Charity Gala, the Grand Hotel Atlanta, Saturday, 7 p.m. Black tie, $20,000 per plate. Preston's throwing a fundraiser tonight, I said. His last desperate attempt to convince investors to bail him out. He's going to be selling everything art jewelry, family heirlooms. And he's going to parade Melissa and Julian around like a trophy couple to prove his stability. We're going, Alexander's hand closed into a fist. We're not just going, we're going to buy everything he tries to sell, and then we're going to take it all away. I started the car. But first you're going to read that text message from Melissa, because I want you to see the difference between what she says and what she does. Alexander opened the message. Alex, I miss you so much. This is killing me. Julian means nothing. It's all for show. Dad made me do this. Please understand. I'll always love you. We'll be together again soon, I promise. Just let me handle Dad. Trust me. M. Alexander stared at the message for a long time. Then he looked out the window at the spot where Melissa and Julian had kissed. He deleted the message. I'm ready, Mom, he said. Let's go to war. Back at the cabin, I finally opened the door to my secret room completely. Alexander needed to see it all. Mom, what is this place? He stared at the monitors, the satellite equipment, the filing cabinets marked with corporate logos he recognized. This is where I run Morgan Capital when I don't feel like going to Manhattan. I showed him the portfolios, the holdings, the companies we owned, pieces of some he'd heard of, some he hadn't. We own 47% of the media conglomerate that runs half the newspapers in Georgia, I said, pulling up a screen. 33% of the state's largest hospital network. 62% of the commercial real estate in downtown Atlanta. How much are you worth, Mom? $12 billion, give or take. It fluctuates with the market. Alexander sat down heavily in the desk chair. And I was trying to fix your roof. I knelt beside him. Alex, that's exactly why I love you. That's exactly why I knew you were ready for this. You have everything you need to succeed. Integrity, intelligence, compassion. The only thing you were missing was the tools. I stood up and opened a locked drawer. Inside was a black titanium card. American Express Centurion. No limit. Invitation only. You had to spend at least $1 million a year just to qualify. This is yours now, I said, handing it to him. Your name's already on it. Has been for 5 years. I was waiting for the right time to give it to you. Alexander held the card like it might explode. Tonight, Preston's going to try to auction off his family's legacy to save himself. I continued. He's going to sell art jewelry heirlooms, and you're going to outbid everyone in that room. Why? Because I want him to see that the weak bloodline he despised has more power than he ever dreamed of. I want him to hand his family's treasures to you personally, and then I want him to watch as you destroy them. Alexander looked up at me. Destroy them. You'll know when the moment comes. I pulled out my phone and called Rebecca. Everything's set for tonight. The board is ready, Rebecca said. We've prepared the presentation. The FBI is standing by. Julian Ashford's accounts were frozen at 8 a.m. He's been declined for every transaction today. He won't be able to finance Preston's bridge loan. Perfect. And the revelation, timed for 9 p.m., right after the final auction item. Good. We'll see you tonight. I hung up and looked at Alexander. Get some rest. Tonight's going to be a long night. Mom, I don't think I can sleep. Then don't. Spend time with Ethan. Play with him. Remember what we're fighting for. Alexander nodded and left the room. I sat alone in front of the monitors watching stock tickers scroll past, thinking about tomorrow. Tomorrow, Preston Sterling would wake up in a jail cell. Tomorrow, his company would be restructured under new management. Tomorrow, Alexander would begin building something better from the ashes. But tonight was about justice, and I was going to make damn sure it was served cold. The Grand Hotel lived up to its name that evening. It glowed like a beacon against the Atlanta skyline, every window ablaze with light. A red carpet stretched from the curb to the revolving brass doors, flanked by velvet ropes and photographers who'd been paid to make the guests feel important. I watched from the tinted window of our limousine, not the old truck this time. Tonight called for different weapons. Alexander sat across from me in his midnight blue suit. He'd been quiet since we left the cabin, but it wasn't the silence of defeat. It was the silence of a predator waiting to strike. "You ready?" I asked. He straightened his tie. "I've been ready since yesterday." We watched the guests arrive. Women in gowns that cost more than cars. Men in tuxedos laughing too loud at jokes that weren't funny. And there at the top of the stairs stood the welcoming committee. Preston Sterling in his element, white dinner jacket, rose boutonniere, playing the role of benevolent patriarch while his empire crumbled around him. Beside him stood Melissa and Julian posing for photographers, her in a silver gown that probably cost $20,000, him with his hand possessively on her waist. They were selling an image, young love, family stability, a dynasty that would survive. It was all a lie, and in about 2 hours the whole world would know it. Our limousine pulled up to the VIP spot. The photographers turned their lenses expecting a celebrity. The driver opened the door. I stepped out first. I wasn't wearing flannel tonight. I was wearing a black Valentino gown that I'd kept in storage for a decade. My mother's diamond earrings, each worth more than Preston's car. My hair was styled by a professional Rebecca had flown in from New York. I looked like what I was, a woman who owned $12 billion and knew exactly how to use it. Alexander stepped out after me. In his Brioni suit with his shoulders back and his chin up, he looked like he'd been born to wealth, like he'd never spent a single night sleeping on a park bench. The cameras started flashing. I saw the exact moment Preston noticed us. He was mid-laugh with a donor champagne flute raised. The laugh died in his throat. His eyes bulged. He blinked rapidly like he was trying to clear a hallucination. He recognized me barely. The gown and jewelry threw him off. But when he saw Alexander, his face went from shock to violent red. He abandoned all decorum, ran down the marble stairs, signaled frantically to security. "Security, get over here now!" The guests nearby stopped talking. The photographers lowered their cameras, sensing drama. Preston reached us before we could step onto the carpet, planting himself in our path. His chest heaved with fury and panic. "What the hell do you think you're doing here, Elizabeth?" Spittle flew from his lips. "This is a private black tie gala, not a soup kitchen." He turned to Alexander, eyes raking over the expensive suit with confusion and rage. "Did you rob someone for that costume, playing dress-up before crawling back to the gutter?" The security guard approached, hand moving to his radio. "Sir, this is invitation only. I need to ask you to—" Alexander didn't flinch, didn't apologize, didn't shrink. He simply reached into his jacket and pulled out a heavy cream envelope with gold edges. Preston snatched it from Alexander's hand, ripping it open like a wild animal. "Impossible. I approved every name on that list. If you forged this, I'll have you arrested for fraud." He pulled out the card. It wasn't paper. It was rigid, heavy, plated in actual gold leaf. The kind of invitation sent only to the top 5 donors, the whales who could save a sinking ship with a single check. Preston's hands started shaking as he read the name embossed in raised lettering, Morgan Capital and Associates. His face went from red to gray in seconds. "Morgan Capital," he whispered. This is stolen. You stole this from someone's mailbox. You're thieves." He spun to the security guard, waving the invitation like evidence at a trial. "Arrest them. Morgan Capital is a billion-dollar hedge fund. These 2 are unemployed losers. This is theft." The hotel manager appeared at the top of the stairs, a distinguished man in his 60s who'd been briefed by Rebecca this morning. He descended with the grace of a diplomat approaching a crime scene. "Is there a problem, Mr. Sterling?" His voice cut through the chaos. Preston jabbed a finger at us. Yes, these imposters stole an invitation meant for a VIP donor. I want the police called immediately. The manager took the invitation from Preston's trembling hand, examined it for exactly 2 seconds. Mr. Sterling, he said coolly, this invitation is valid. It was issued this morning by the charity board to Ms. Elizabeth Morgan and her associate. Preston's mouth worked, but no sound came out. The manager turned to us. Ms. Morgan, please accept my apologies for the disturbance. Your table is waiting. I stepped forward, my heels clicking on marble. I am Elizabeth Morgan, I said, voice quiet but carrying the weight of $12 billion. And this is my son, Alexander Morgan. We represent the capital that's going to save your auction tonight. I paused, looking directly at Preston. Unless, of course, you don't want our money. Preston was trapped. If he kicked us out in front of the press and the hotel management, he'd lose the biggest potential donors of the night. He'd look insane. But letting us in meant allowing wolves into the sheep pen. His desperation won. Let them in, he said through clenched teeth. We walked past him up the stairs. As we reached the top, we came face to face with Melissa and Julian. Melissa stared at Alexander. Her mouth fell open. She looked at the suit, the way he carried himself, the cold indifference in his eyes where adoration used to live. Julian stepped forward, puffing out his chest. Listen, loser, I don't know who you mugged for that suit, but you don't belong. I wouldn't worry about embarrassment, Julian, Alexander said, voice dripping with amusement. I'd worry about your credit score. I heard it took a hit this morning. Multiple declined transactions. Must be frustrating. Julian froze. He'd been trying to access his accounts all day. Every card declined. Every wire transfer blocked. He didn't know it was us. Until now. Alexander smiled cold and sharp as a blade. Shall we go inside, Mother? I believe the auction is about to start. We walked past them into the grand ballroom. Behind us, I heard Preston shouting at the manager. Melissa asking Julian what Alexander meant. Julian frantically dialing his father's office. The confusion was setting in. The panic was taking root. And the night had barely begun. The ballroom was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers, white orchids on every table, a string quartet playing Vivaldi in the corner, 300 guests in designer clothes drinking champagne that cost more per bottle than most people earned in a week. Our table was at the very front. Table 1, reserved for Morgan Capital. Alexander and I sat down. A waiter immediately appeared with champagne. Alexander took a glass with a steady hand. You doing okay? I asked quietly. I feel angry, he said. But it's useful anger. Good. Hold on to it. On stage, the auctioneer was setting up a fast-talking man with a gavel that looked like a weapon. Behind him, items were being arranged on velvet-draped tables. Preston walked onto the stage 10 minutes later. He'd composed himself somewhat, but I could see sweat on his forehead despite the aggressive air conditioning. He grabbed the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, his voice boomed, trying to sound confident. Welcome to an evening of giving tonight. We're not just raising money, we're securing the future. Polite applause. The auction began with smaller items. A watch, a sculpture, some jewelry, and every single time Alexander outbid Julian. Item 1, vintage Rolex. $10,000 starting bid. Julian raised his paddle. 10,000. Alexander didn't hesitate. 20,000. Murmurs in the crowd. Julian red-faced. 25. Alexander calm as stone. 50,000. Gasps. Sold to paddle number 1. Item 2, crystal sculpture. $5,000 starting. Julian 5. Alexander 20,000. Sold. Item 3, Melissa's diamond bracelet. $25,000 starting. This one was personal. Melissa stood up, showing the bracelet on her wrist before removing it. She waved to the crowd, playing the generous philanthropist. Alexander didn't wait for the auctioneer. $200,000, he announced, voice carrying across the room. Complete silence. The auctioneer blinked. Sir, we haven't started. I'm starting it and ending it. 200,000. Do I hear a counter? Julian looked at Melissa, shook his head. His accounts were frozen. He had nothing. Sold, Preston said from the side of the stage, trying to maintain control. Alexander walked up to collect the bracelet. He stood face to face with Melissa for the first time since she'd betrayed him. Alex, she whispered. What are you doing? Where did you... He took the bracelet, looked at it, then at her. You're right, this is beautiful. I think I'll give it to someone who deserves it. He walked back to our table and handed it to me. Happy birthday, Mom, he said loud enough for nearby tables to hear. A little early, but you've earned it. I put it on. It sparkled under the chandeliers. Thank you, sweetheart. Preston was sweating heavily now. Julian was staring at his phone in disbelief. Melissa looked like she might cry. The pattern continued for 45 minutes. Every item Alexander outbid everyone by massive amounts. He'd spent over $1 million, and we hadn't even reached the main event. The lights dimmed. A single spotlight illuminated the velvet-draped easel at center stage. Preston walked to the microphone, dabbing his forehead with a handkerchief. Ladies and gentlemen, we come to the final item of the evening. His voice cracked slightly. This is not just art. This is the heart of the Sterling family. He gestured dramatically. Two assistants pulled back the velvet cloth. Beneath it was an oil painting from the 1800s, the founding Sterling patriarch standing in front of a factory. Dark, moody, dripping with old money aesthetics. This heirloom has been in my family for 4 generations. Preston continued, voice thick with fake emotion. It represents our resilience, our industry, our legacy. I offer it tonight not because I want to part with it, but because the cause we support is greater than any possession. He paused for effect. Starting bid $50,000. This was the centerpiece, the main money laundering scheme. Julian was supposed to bid it up to $200,000, injecting cash directly into Preston's charity, which Preston would then raid to pay his debts. Tax-free money laundering wrapped in a tuxedo. The auctioneer took the podium. Do I hear 50,000? Julian raised his paddle immediately. 50,000 applause. Do I hear 60? Julian raised again, bypassing the increment. 100,000 gasps. More applause. Preston exhaled with visible relief. A magnificent gesture from Mr. Ashford, truly generous. Julian stood playing to the crowd. 200,000. This was it. The amount Preston needed to survive another week. 200,000, the auctioneer chanted. Going once, Alexander raised his paddle. $500,000. The silence was absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens when a bomb drops but hasn't exploded yet. Every head in the ballroom turned toward our table. Julian's smirk fell off his face like it had been slapped away. Melissa choked on her champagne. But it was Preston's reaction that shattered the decorum. He didn't look happy. He didn't look grateful. He looked furious. He marched to the edge of the stage, pointing a shaking finger at Alexander. Stop! Stop this immediately! This is fraud! The auctioneer looked confused. Mr. Sterling, excuse me. He has no money, Preston screamed, voice cracking. That man is my former son-in-law. I fired him yesterday. He's destitute. He's living in a shack. He's trying to sabotage my auction with fake bids. The crowd erupted in murmurs. People stood up, craning to see the imposter. He's a nobody. Preston was losing it completely. He couldn't buy a sandwich, let alone a painting. This is criminal. Arrest him for disrupting a charity event. The auctioneer looked nervous. Sir, these are serious accusations. I must ask for immediate verification of funds. It was a humiliation tactic. Verification normally happened privately after the event. Preston smiled viciously, crossing his arms. Yes, verify. I'll wait. This will be entertaining. Alexander stood up slowly, buttoned his jacket, walked toward the stage. The crowd parted for him like the Red Sea. He approached the auctioneer's podium where a credit card terminal sat. Preston laughed a harsh, ugly sound. Look at him. Probably has a library card. Get him out. Alexander didn't say a word. He held up the card so the light caught the black titanium surface. The auctioneer's eyes widened. He recognized the centurion immediately. Alexander placed the card on the reader. Single long beep. Green light flashed approved. The auctioneer looked at the screen, then at the audience. His voice was respectful and terrified. The bid is verified. Funds are secured. We have $500,000 from Mr. Morgan. Preston staggered backward like he'd been shot. Julian jumped up, phone to his ear, screaming $550,000. Alexander calm, $600,000. Julian desperately, Dad, authorize the transfer. I need liquidity now. Alexander, $750,000. Julian's face fell. He lowered his phone, looked at Preston, shook his head. He was cut off. The bank of Daddy was closed. Mr. Ashford, do you wish to counter? The auctioneer asked. Julian slumped into his chair. No bid. The room buzzed with electricity. Alexander held up his hand, silencing everyone. $1 million, he said clearly. But I have a condition. The auctioneer looked at Preston nervously. A condition, sir. Yes, Alexander's voice rang out. I'm buying this painting to help the Sterling family in their desperate time of need. Since Mr. Sterling was kind enough to personally escort me out of his home yesterday, I think it's only fair that he personally delivers this painting to me. Right now. He pointed to the floor in front of our table. I want Preston Sterling to carry that painting down here and hand it to me, if he wants the $1 million he has to work for it. The room went dead silent. This wasn't business. This was public execution. Preston looked at the painting, looked at the $1 million figure on the screen, knew that money was the only thing standing between him and total ruin. If he walked away, he lost everything. If he carried the painting, he lost his dignity. But dignity doesn't pay the mortgage. I watched Preston's internal struggle, saw the exact moment his pride broke. His shoulders slumped. Slowly, painfully, he reached for the painting, lifted it off the easel. It was heavy, he grunted under the weight. He stepped down the stairs, knees shaking. He walked through the silent crowd carrying the symbol of his ancestors like a servant delivering a package. He reached our table, breathing hard, sweat dripping down his face. Here, he whispered, unable to meet Alexander's eyes. Take it. Alexander didn't take it immediately. He let Preston hold it for 5 more seconds, letting the weight burn into his arms. Thank you, Preston, Alexander said, finally taking the frame. You can go now. Preston turned and walked away, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the silence. Alexander looked at the painting, looked at the stern face of Preston's great-grandfather. Then he spoke, his voice amplified by the table microphone. I didn't pay $1 million because I want to hang this on my wall. I paid to show you that your history, your pride, your name, they're just commodities, and I can buy them whenever I want. Preston stopped walking, turned around. Just give me the check, he started. I'm not buying art, Alexander interrupted. I'm buying my freedom. Then, with sudden violent motion, he drove his knee upward and brought the painting down hard. The sound of century-old canvas tearing was like a gunshot. The wood frame snapped with a dry, loud crack. A woman in the front row screamed. Alexander didn't stop. He ripped the canvas in half, tearing through the Sterling patriarch's face. Ripped it again and again, reducing the symbol of their bloodline to tatters. He threw the splintered wood and shredded canvas onto the floor at Preston's feet. There's your legacy, Alexander said, dusting off his hands. It's trash. Just like the way you treated my son. Preston stared at the debris. His face turned violent purple. Veins bulged in his neck. He forgot the cameras, forgot the investors, forgot everything except blind rage. You animal! He lunged toward Alexander, fist raised. I'll kill you! I stepped out from behind the table, walking into the spotlight. Sit down, Preston. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried a resonance that froze him mid-swing. He looked at me bewildered. Who are you to tell me what to do, old woman? You're nothing. Get out of my way. I walked up the stairs to the stage. The spotlight hit me, and I didn't blink. I looked toward the back of the room, toward the sound booth. Rebecca, I said calmly. Kill the lights. Show Mr. Sterling the news. The ballroom plunged into darkness. The chandeliers dimmed to nothing. The only light came from the massive projection screen behind the stage. A logo appeared, a golden lion holding a key. The logo of Morgan Capital. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Everyone in that room knew the logo. It represented one of the most aggressive, successful private equity firms in the country. Preston looked at the screen, confused. What is this? Why is Morgan's logo on my screen? The slide changed. A legal document. High-resolution scan. Signed that very morning. Assignment of debt. Debtor Sterling Technology Solutions and Preston Sterling primary creditor, Morgan Capital, amount outstanding $47 million, status default. Preston read the words. His mouth opened. No sound came out. He read them again. He looked at the signature line at the bottom, authorized signature Elizabeth Morgan, chairman. He turned slowly to look at me. Really looked at me. At the Valentino gown. The diamonds. The way I stood, not like a retired widow, but like someone who'd built empires. The realization hit him like a physical blow. His knees actually buckled. He grabbed the podium to stay upright. You, he whispered, voice trembling with horror. You're Morgan. I stepped closer, the microphone catching every word. I am Elizabeth Morgan, And for the last 10 years, I've been content to be just a mother and grandmother. I left this world behind because I found more value in a quiet life. I pointed to the screen where evidence of his failure glowed in high definition. But you dragged me back, Preston. You told my son his bloodline was unworthy. You told him he came from nothing. You were so blinded by arrogance that you didn't even bother to check who you were declaring war on. I turned to the audience, hundreds of stunned faces. Mr. Sterling calls himself a business leader, but the truth is Sterling Tech has been insolvent for 2 years. He's been funding his lifestyle by laundering company assets and burying his family in debt. He fired my son not because of performance, but because he needed a scapegoat for his own crimes. I turned back to Preston. You said you wanted a noble bloodline, Preston. Well, here's the truth about bloodlines. My bloodline doesn't use children as collateral. My bloodline doesn't sell daughters to cover bad loans. And my bloodline certainly doesn't kick 6-year-old boys onto the street. My voice rose, filling the ballroom. We use our money to build things, and occasionally we use it to teach lessons to people who've forgotten what honor means. Preston looked around frantically for an ally for an escape, but Melissa was sobbing at her table. Julian had disappeared out the back door. The guests stared at him with disgust and fascination. But the deadline, Preston stammered. The bank said noon tomorrow. I still have time. Read the fine print, Preston. Rebecca zoomed the screen to Clause 14 Immediate Acceleration Clause. In event of confirmed financial malfeasance or reputational damage, creditor reserves right to demand full repayment immediately. Your stunt at the bank this morning, I said. The audit we triggered on your accounts, that's reputational damage. The money laundering investigation the FBI is opening as we speak, that's financial malfeasance. I checked my watch, the Patek Philippe I'd worn for the first time in a decade. It's 9 p.m. I'm activating the clause. You have until midnight to wire $47 million. 3 hours, Preston. No, you can't. This is my company. My father built. It was your company. I walked toward him, closing the distance. As of 1 minute ago, I executed foreclosure on all secured assets. The factory, the patents, this building. I leaned in close so only he and the microphone could hear. And it includes your house, Preston, the one you kicked my son out of. You're trespassing on my property. I stepped back. You're fired, Preston. Get out of my building. The heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom opened. 6 men in FBI windbreakers marched in. Preston saw them. For a moment, he looked like he might run, but there was nowhere to go. 2 agents stepped up, spun him around. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut was metallic finality. Preston started shouting about lawyers, about rights, about misunderstandings. But nobody was listening. The guests were too busy filming with their phones, documenting the fall of a titan. As Preston was led away, Melissa stood up. Her mascara was streaking. Her carefully styled hair was coming undone. She looked around the ballroom, her father being arrested, her lover gone, her life collapsing. Her eyes landed on Alexander. She ran toward him, heels clicking desperately on marble. She threw herself at his feet, grabbing his hand with both of hers. "Alex, please," she sobbed. "You have to help me. You know I didn't want this. I was forced. Daddy made me. He said he'd disown me." The room watched in fascination. "I never stopped loving you." She clung to his jacket. "You know that. We can fix this. We can start over. Just tell them to stop. Tell your mom to stop. We're family." Alexander looked down at her. For a second, I saw the memory of who she used to be flicker in his eyes. Then he looked at her hand. She was still wearing Julian's ring, the massive diamond. She hadn't even taken it off. He gently pulled his hand from her grip. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his handkerchief, the silk square I'd tucked there. He didn't use it to wipe her tears. He handed it to her. "Stand up, Melissa." She stood shaking, hoping. "You weren't forced," Alexander said, voice gentle but firm. "You made a trade. You traded a husband who loved you for a lifestyle you thought you deserved. You bet on the money. No, Alex, it's exactly like that. You loved the Sterling name. You loved the credit cards. You loved the house. And you thought I was the weak link threatening all that." He took a step back. "The problem isn't that you left me, Melissa. The problem is you think you can come back just because the money changed hands. You didn't love me when I was poor, and you don't get to love me now that I'm powerful. Melissa froze, realizing the bridge wasn't just burned, it was demolished. "The sterling money is gone, Melissa," Alexander said quietly. "And so are you." He didn't say goodbye. He simply turned and walked away, walked past the agents, past the guests, past his entire old life. He walked toward the double doors, stride long and confident. Melissa collapsed onto the floor, sobbing. But Alexander didn't look back. He kept walking until he disappeared into the night, leaving the wreckage of his past behind. I followed him out. We stood on the steps of the Grand Hotel, breathing in the cool Atlanta air. "How do you feel?" I asked. "Free," he said. "For the first time in 5 years, I feel free." I put my arm around my son. "Let's go home." The sun was setting over Morgan Lake, painting the water in shades of gold and amber. I sat on the dock with my fishing rod exactly where I'd been the day Alexander called me from that park. But everything was different now. The cabin was still there. I'd refused to fix the roof. I liked it that way. It reminded me what mattered. But on the hill above the cabin sat a new house. Not a mansion. Just a comfortable 4-bedroom home where Alexander and Ethan lived. Close enough to visit. Far enough to be independent. I heard footsteps on the dock. Alexander appeared carrying 2 cups of coffee. He sat beside me, both of us watching our lines. "How was your day?" I asked. "Good. The board approved the new benefits package. Full health care for all employees, including part-time. Profit-sharing program. Mental health coverage." He was CEO of Thorne Innovations, now the company we'd built from Sterling Tech's ashes. Same employees, same technology, completely different culture. From fear to innovation. From exploitation to empowerment. "Your father would be proud," I said. "I hope so." We sat in comfortable silence. "I heard Preston's sentencing was today," Alexander said carefully. 15 years, federal prison. He'll be eligible for parole in 10. And Melissa filed for bankruptcy, working as a hostess at a restaurant in Buckhead. Julian dumped her the day after the gala. Alexander nodded slowly. No satisfaction in his voice. No revenge. Just peace. "Do you regret it?" I asked. "Any of it? No. I regret wasting 5 years on someone who didn't value me. But everything that came after," he looked at me, "that I don't regret at all." A car pulled up our weekend tradition. Ethan jumped out and ran down to the dock. "Grandma, Daddy, I caught a frog." He was holding a small green frog, grinning from ear to ear. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I said, pulling him into a hug. "Did you let him go?" "Yeah, by the lily pads like you taught me." The 3 of us sat on that dock, 3 generations, 3 fishing rods. "Grandma?" Ethan asked after a while. "Yes, baby. Kids at school say you're really rich, like crazy rich." Alexander tensed, but I smiled. "What do you think, Ethan?" He looked around at the lake, at the trees, at his father beside him. "I think you're rich in the important ways. You have time to fish with me. That's pretty rich." I pulled him close. "You're wiser than most adults, kiddo." We watched the sun set over the water I owned, but never bragged about. Somewhere in Atlanta, a company was thriving on principles of integrity. But here in this moment, it was just a family. And that was worth more than all $12 billion in my accounts.